Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this first artist conversation we are organizing to complement an exhibition of the winners of the 2020 Governor General's Awards in Visual and Media Arts that is currently installed at the Art Gallery of Alberta. My name is Catherine Croston, and I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator at the AGA. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are hosting the exhibition and this webinar from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, and Anishinaabe and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge all of the Indigenous and Inuit peoples who make Alberta their home today. This acknowledgement is just a small step along the path toward reconciliation, and we acknowledge the critical work that must continue to be done to address the impacts of colonization. Canada's Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts is a Lifetime Achievement Award that recognizes an artist's career, their body of work, and contribution to the visual arts, media arts, and fine craft through the Sadie Bronfman Award in Canada. This year, 8 artists are being honored in recognition of their exceptional careers and remarkable contributions to the visual arts, media arts, and fine craft. The 2020 winners are Deanna Bowen, Dana Claxton, Ruth Cuthand, Michael Fernandez, Jorge Lozano Lorza, Ken Lum, Anna Torma, and Zainub Verjee, who is recognized for her outstanding contribution to the profession. Zainub Verjee is a trailblazer for her generation. She is an accomplished artist, writer, critic, cultural bureaucrat, cultural diplomat, and a public intellectual. She is currently the executive director of the Ontario Association of Art Galleries, now called Galleries Ontario, Ontario Galleries in Toronto. Born in Kenya and educated in the UK, she arrived in Canada in the early 1970s and studied business administration and economics at Simon Fraser University. Zainub began her career in the arts soon after. She engaged with the Third Cinema, the tactical video movement, UK's British Black Arts, post-Bandung decolonization, and the women's labor movement in British Columbia. In 1989, she co-founded and co-directed Invisible Colors, an international women of color and third world women's film and video festival and symposium. Zainub was the executive director at the Western Front in Vancouver in the 1990s. In 1993, her work on the British Columbia Arts Board led to the formation of the British Columbia Arts Council. She then worked at the Canada Council for the Arts and the Department of Canadian Heritage in Ottawa, after which she was appointed the inaugural director of the Culture Division for the city of Mississauga. Zainub is a multidisciplinary artist whose work has been shown at major venues, including the Venice Biennale, the Portland Institute of Contemporary Art, the Centre d'Art Contemporain de Basse-Normandie, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She is presently exhibiting at the Art Gallery of Alberta, as well as at Embassy Cultural House in London, Ontario. Her work will be shown at Centre A in Vancouver in June of 2021, and her work exists in public and private collections. Zainub is a prolific writer and a speaker, engaging national and international audiences on issues of cultural diplomacy, pluralism, and racial equity. She will deliver a keynote on cultural diplomacy at the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art in London in 2021. She recently co-authored an open letter to the Prime Minister of Canada on behalf of 75,000 artists and is currently involved in the national campaign on basic income. Zainub is a passionate and persuasive champion of the art and its central role in society. She lives by her conviction that art is public good. With over 4 decades of expertise in cultural policy and cultural diplomacy, she has contributed to international and national policies and legislation pertaining to the cultural sector, including United Nations instruments such as the status of the artist and cultural diversity. Zainub Verjee is a laureate of the 2020 Governor General's Awards for outstanding contribution in the visual and media arts. Tonight, Zainub is in conversation with Niranjan Rajah. Niranjan Rajah is faculty at the School of Interactive Art and Technology at Simon Fraser University. He co-curated Malaysia's first electronic art show and co-founded eArt ASEAN, the first regional portal for electronic art in Southeast Asia. Niranjan's web artwork, The Failure of Marcel Duchamp, Japanese Fetish Event, is recognized as the first internet artwork in Southeast Asia. His contribution to new media was acknowledged in a two-man retrospective titled Relocations at IZEA Singapore in 2008. Niranjan's autobiographical photo-performative Cowboy Project has been exhibited in Kuala Lumpur, Lisbon, Tokyo, Bangkok, and Black Rock City, and at the Singapore Biennale in 2016. Niranjan immigrated to Canada with his family in 2002. He met Zainub in 2004 while convening the conference Old and New Forms, a post-traditional technography of world media arts for the New Forms Festival in Vancouver. Zainub was a senior program officer for media arts representing the Canada Council in matters concerning this event. Niranjan recently published an essay on Zainub's contributions to the arts titled Zainub Verjee, From Signifier to Signified, for the Other Places, Reflections on Media Arts in Canada Anthology, edited by Deanna Bowen. Niranjan nominated Zainub for the 2020 Governor-General's Award for Outstanding Contribution in the Visual and Media Arts. And before I turn things over to Zainub and Niranjan, just a few notes. Please enter any questions that you have in the chat and we will answer them at the end of the conversation. And I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize and thank EPCOR, who support AGA online programming through their Heart and Soul Fund. Please join me in welcoming Zainub Verjee and Niranjan Rajah.
Thank you, Catherine, so much. And hello, Zainub.
Hello.
It's so great to be here with you, to congratulate you and to celebrate this wonderful award and to say how proud I am for having nominated you. Yes, and to thank those who helped me do it, particularly Stefan Saint Laurent, who proposed together with me the first time we did this, and Narendra Pachkede, who's been behind the whole project, the backbone of the proposal, you know, with the paperwork, the nitty-gritty, and to Durga Rajah for having taken this wonderful photograph that is in fact a part of the Cowboy Project, a series that is upcoming. Congratulations, Zainub.
Thank you so much. I also just want to just begin by thanking, of course, the Art Gallery of Alberta, the Canada Council, Catherine Croston and her amazing team that got the work done in installing and having this programming happening, and of course to you, Niranjan, my nominator, and to all of those, I guess who helped me, get to this place.
So we'll get moving with this conversation, Zainub, by just getting into the theoretical framework that I propose, not just for this conversation, but to appraise your life's work and your contribution to the arts in Canada particularly, but perhaps even broader than that. And, to do that, I'd like to say, go back to our own starting place, the New Forms Festival, where we met, and you were in your capacity in, the administration of the arts, and I was in mine in a kind of curatorial. I was the convener for the conference. The theme was post-traditional media, and, I think there is a relevance to this conversation. The idea that modernism and postmodernism were discourses that emanated from the West in the course of the 20th century. And, by the time we get past 3/4 of the way, there's all this emergence from other parts of the world, from diasporic communities within the First World. And the discourse shifted. Without having a name, it shifted towards broader perspectives. And I propose to call that a post-traditional perspective. And, there's a discourse on what that is. But I think what's most important for our conversation is that this shift in the way we name the period, the way I propose we look at this period, has involved media. So media comes in throughout human history as a disruptive and constructive force: the printing press, the telephone, the video camera, television before that, the internet. So at these junctions, things change, and society changes. The role of the artist changes. The way art is managed in society, the way it's administered in society changes. Just imagine the culture that gave us the amazing Chola bronzes, medieval bronzes in South India. How were those symbols created? What was the infrastructure, the orthodoxy and the hegemony that gave us that, as opposed to what we're doing today, right? So in this context, I'd like to propose, using Deleuze and Guattari's notion of transversality, the idea of a diagonal that cuts through parallel layers and vertical silos, columns, categories, merging, mixing, and enabling change. So technology is part of it. The way we approach the situation is part of it. And I suggest that your career epitomizes a transversal aesthetic, a transversal praxis, a theory and praxis, a practice, and that a simple image to take with us through this conversation is that of the country gate, the English country gate. I've looked at the internet to see what the gates are like in Canada, and they're not as consistently, structured, having this diagonal. And anybody who knows an English country gate will understand the diagonal and the parallels. And so this idea from Palmer and Panateyov, in trying to explain transversality, they gave us this image of the garden gate. So I'd like to put that before us and add one more thing, that in my own approach to art since the mid-90s, I've prioritized metaphysics after Kumarasamy and social history after T.J. Clark. So the idea that art history and the actual aesthetic developments are not as important as these other things, abstraction of ideas and social and political considerations. So having said that, Zainab, I'd like to introduce the exhibition. There's 6 works. Some are reconstructions of much older works. Some are new works created just in the course of the show. Some are recent works. Some are artworks. Some are artifacts, documents of your wide and varied practice throughout your career, which includes making art and making policy for art and everything in between. One small note for the audience and for those who might view this this cast later, this video cast later, the artworks are integrated with audio. And if you look at the media description, you often find in the tag audio included. So there are QR codes in the descriptors that lead you to conversations, presentations, and they're actually to be considered as part of the artwork. And it's the first instance within our conversation where I can say, aha, there's the transversal. It's neither an art piece nor a didactic piece. It's both at an angle. Right? So this is the idea. And having done this, introduced the whole, I want to move quickly into the very first piece, and of course, let Zainab have a chance to respond. The first piece is titled Amnesia. It's from 2019. The medium is book and audio. It is an installation piece or a sculptural piece. It is a ready-made, in my estimation, the mother of all Canadian ready-mades, as it takes as its object the founding artifact, the post-war document that has shaped the Canadian arts in the rest of the 20th century, and I think is still having an impact here. There are other works in the exhibition that refer to this document. The Massey Report, Dana Bowen's work does so. And in a sense, the exhibition itself is an antithesis of the proposals and the trajectory of this document, with all the artists being of color and the one person who isn't works in craft. So, you get this sense that we've moved on from this document, as foundational as it might be. And before I hand off, Zainab, the founding of the Canada Council for the Arts is premised on this document. So I see it as a ready-made that engages with the whole world of Canadian arts, and it's in the middle of the space. Please give us your response.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that amazing foregrounding of our conversation and also of how you've read my work. So yeah, I felt that this work with the Massey report was, which is entitled Amnesia. It really kind of refers to that socio-political conditioning and the use of memory. And we know that amnesia obviously refers to loss of memory. And I felt that my intent was to place the actual document, the physical copy of this report, into the room, because I think it very much needs to be brought to the foreground, and we need to re-examine and we need to revisit it. And as you rightly said, it actually became the foundational document that gave armature of what would become state-defined national culture in this country, in Canada. And I think it very much still operates as a controlling text and dictates our present, because it still defines national culture in Canada, and it was also the document and the process through which these institutions were founded, such as the Canada Council for the Arts. It expanded the National Film Board, National Archives and National Gallery, etc. But it gave also, it gave birth to the idea of Canadian content. And in that, it remains a controlling text and defines very much what is Canadian culture, to the exclusion of Canadian art making and even Canadian art experiences to some extent. And so I think that it was really important for me to have this within the exhibition as part of my work, because I think that, and I'm going to refer to this again because it's also, kind of speaks in the room as to other works within the works that I have within this exhibition.
So Zainab, I'll come in here to develop this idea of art history, really. Having said I'm not interested in it, stylistically, the very part that I'm least interested in. What happened in the course of the 20th century with the Western, with the modernist to postmodernist trajectory, is that the art came off the wall. It became, a space. It became a performance. It became a process. Institutional critique became the subject or the medium in which artists worked, and it reached a certain point where really the next step, the next meta, perspective on it required stepping out. Require stepping out of the making of art into the making of its very context. You start building the space, Rosalind Krauss's negative, you start cutting the hole in the ground. You start looking at the space itself, and then the spaces are founded on policy and implementations of policies and ideas. So you get into the ideology of the state, the nation, and its relationship to art, the role of art in the nation. Coming from a developing country, coming from Malaysia, we have post-1969 riots, we have the Cultural Congress, and we have a founding document, that from the 70s on shaped relations, and for better and worse, both has given shape. So I would just like to say that, from the transversality aspect, you've merged the two, making of the art, stepping away from making art to working in government, administration, funding, policy, and now you're coming back to make a work integrating the two. And I just thought I'd say that and mark it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very much actually the way I've had to work, or the way that I have worked in my trajectory in working in culture and as an artist, really, because my interventions have been like you're suggesting, perhaps.
So I think we can move on. I think we have a lot to say, a lot to discuss on the next item. So we can come back to this because it's important. I think it contextualizes everything else. But let's, for now, move on to the piece that opens the exhibition itself, not just your component, but as you enter the exhibition space, you meet Zainub Verjee's Status of the Artist in LED neon. I think a new work for this exhibition, if I'm correct. And let me say this much. The idea that the artist has a role in society, is understood in all cultures, from the shaman to the, it merges with different functions, the priest and the artist as opposed to the priest, the artist as an independent, marker of freedom and rebellion, the romantic idea of the artist, or now the artist who's quietly subscribed and been assimilated to the neoliberal complex, shamelessly, really, today. This is the relationship. This is the question of the status of the artist. And this is what you refer us to, using the strategies of an earlier era, conceptual art, Lawrence Weiner and so on, the text as a thing in itself. However, with a difference that it's no longer reflexive. It's not Joseph Kosuth. It's something else. It's post all of this. And one thing that may not strike the audience as obvious, because I too missed it, is that the phrase "status of the artist" in fact refers to Canadian law, and Canadian law that derives from a founding United Nations recommendation about the status of the artist, named the status of the artist, and adopted by UNESCO in 1980 as something to monitor and for nations to report on. What are they doing with regard to the status of the artist? Seems to be a responsibility for the signatories, for the member states. And further, that as we move on into the digital era, the present era, the Netflix era, there are further implications. I won't eat into your spiel, Zainab, but this is the introduction for you to.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Thank you. It is the very opening of the entire exhibition, and it's a bold statement. I think even really very much so today, because it's directly connected with something that I've been working with over the last several months quite intensely, and it's about the issues of labor, actually. The letter to the Prime Minister is about that, on basic income, but I've been saying repeatedly that today the world of labor looks a lot like the way art labor has looked for decades. The status of the artist, it's really about, what does an artist do? How much does it cost? How much does being an artist actually cost? And the status is really the need to acknowledge the atypical way in which they work, and their low and irregular income, their international issues. And an artist earns 43% less than general labor. And rightly said, this year marked the 40th anniversary of the status of the artist from that declaration made in UNESCO in Belgrade. And of course, this legislation attempts really to place artists on an equal footing with other professionals in the labor market, and to earn a more equitable share of the profits on their work in the economy. Now, what I feel was really important in this is what I'm invoking in all of this is the political economy and the crisis of the labor of artists. Recently I gave a keynote at a conference in Ottawa, the Artpreneur conference, which was put on by Arts Network Ottawa, and the whole keynote was really highlighting how we've come to this idea of the death of the artist and the birth of the creative. And the slide that's been put up, let me explain it just really quickly, because what you're seeing here is the transitioning role of artists and its political economy. The first part is the post-war period. You can see this process of institutionalization is occurring. We talked about Massey, the institutions are being created, and this is where we start to turn the artists into professionals, with this sort of attempt to make them part of the middle class. And then the next period is really the onset of the establishment of neoliberalism. In simpler terms, it's the market actually becomes the champion through free trade, and culture becomes one of the commodities to be traded. And it's the globalization of the market and the place of labor in it, Niranjan, right? So we know that labor was outsourced, and what happens in art, the same thing. It becomes biennalized and festivalized. And though I'm saying this in like one sort of simple statement or sentence, this process was simple, and it really saw many upheavals. And then you come into the current, which is really where you see in the last 2 decades, the IT and the market, they join forces, and it sort of becomes like the winner takes all model. And in a way that this kind of completes the cycle of the death of the artist and the birth of the creative. And now this creative, which we're in, right, is this platform economy with the market and IT coming together. And what we really see is the segmentation of work, labor, and jobs. And we have to the process of professionalization and entrepreneurship. What we see is this political segmentation of how we act, create, and produce. And so, this is really what this was about, because I think that is really important to show and understand. Because what I realized more so than I ever have before is the importance to understand the political economy. We've been given an opportunity through this crisis of the health, the economy, and the social crises to come out differently. We cannot go back to what we were. And so I think this is really important, right? That we understand the political economy in which we operate as a sector and as artists that have now been pushed to become these creatives.
So Zainab, to keep going on this and to review it a little bit, because it's quite involved and needs a little unpacking. And to be honest, in spite of various conversations, I'm still working on getting the whole picture. But I have my own attack, centered around, like I've written in, the Biennale and the art fair, the shift that has happened, that culture. How do we as artists move in the world, right? We make our work, we have ideas, we have things we want to say, we have reasons that are our own personal, political, so many different ways to make art. And not all of us think about the framing mechanisms. Yes, when we get to the gallery, we think of the walls and we say, can you move that one? And sometimes you can, because the Canada Council has funded the gallery and they've got mobile walls. So yes, the whole thing is one system. And what this chart is laying out is the nature of that work, profession, labor, the nature of it vis-a-vis the framing mechanism. So the ultimate framing mechanism is, of course, the political economy as a whole, right? And here we have the relationship of the different aspects of art policy, let's say, and art reality to that frame. So at first, we have the first phase where the Massey sets up the professionalization of the artist with all its faults, all its exclusions, which we have addressed in some extent. This Governor General's Award cycle shows the way we are addressing the failures of Massey. But nevertheless, Massey created this space within Canadian art between a kind of, government intervention to protect the artist and a little bit of free space engagement with the market and so on. And then we come to the 70s, the grant model, basically. Then we come to the 70s and we're blasted out the water. The world art markets take off. And this is great for us in Southeast Asia. We now can compete on the global stage. People start seeing our work. So it's good. But at the same time, it's part of the neoliberal hollowing out of the social good, if you like, the public good, which we come to later. And art becomes entangled in this. The professionalization is being dismantled and it's becoming part of a capitalist flow. It's less a work like a salaryman job, which it was in Canada under the Canada Council. And now it's like you got to compete with the big beasts out there. And, got to get into the biennales, and the biennales have to compete for the funding, and the sponsors are the corporates and so on. So the art starts shifting in terms of who it works for, what it symbolizes in the meta level. And then we come to the next phase, which is to do with technology, I believe. And you've said, you didn't mention it, but you said it before, Tony Blair being the instigator of this notion of the creative economy. See, at my school is a school of art and technology. We work with the latest, developments in AI and big data and so on, visualization and so on. And in a sense, we're producing creatives, not artists. As in Simon Fraser University, we have a sister school of contemporary arts to do that. But it does seem that, in the age of Netflix, it's the creatives who get a look in. So I don't know if that characterization is correct, and also if it prompts you to say more.
Yeah, it is correct. I think you lay out that as well. So Tony Blair was the one who kind of brings in this idea of the creative. Canada embraced Richard Florida at all levels of government, right? And it was very much about also this sort of one idea of bringing market and IT together and really displacing artists and pushing them aside for this sort of other entity, as it were. I don't want to think of a person like that, but that's literally what's happened, right? And now, and the status of the artist, the Massey, they're not part of art education. They're not embedded in that. I think this platform economy it's really, I think, more evident now. We're seeing it, right, as the people, we were convinced. David's writes about this, that you had this new platform. You could do anything now because you had that availability. But it's Silicon Valley actually who has the control of that, right? Now what's really going to be important is not the artists like me and you. It's the people who can have access. It's that 1% that can have access to these platform economies in a full way, right?
Yeah.
Reality is out. The likes are in, right? How many likes do you have? How many influencers follow you? How many? It's the Instagram. It's become the platforms, right? That have important, and more we see the erosion of space for artists, because there's not a critical space. It's a do you like space? Do you like me? It's like so I think yeah.
So the changes. So this gives me a good segue to go on to the next topic, to another point in time, right? Another moment in media disruption. Disruptions work both ways. I think if you go with Brecht and radio, he was so concerned with the use of radio for propaganda, as if it'd been taken over, by this is pre-war Germany, and so the radio medium, and he writes about reclaiming it, right? So this is exactly how people like us, or like me, let's speak for myself, you know, my major engagement in art and media happens around the advent of the World Wide Web. You know, so at that moment, Howard Rheingold, the Agora, you know, the idea that this wonderful space is opening up, we can get past the big corporate media. And look what's happened. The corporate media got past us. Like, they own the internet, and it's less open than television. You know, at least you could get up and walk away from the television. You can't walk away from your phone, right? So they're broadcasting to us all the time now. So it's this recuperation of the broadcast by capital, right? So Invisible Colors was a 1989 event, a groundbreaking event that happened in Vancouver. Zainab, as a co-founding director of this event, is responsible. And I guess, you know, the few things I want to say before handing over to you are, it seems to be a conflation of various forces, right? So the nominal idea is women, right? And the issues of women of color, the next idea is layered on. And yet it was only possible because of media. Once again, this idea of the post-traditional media, my approach anyway, the idea that a technology arrived, I think it was in 69, 67, the Sony Portapack came in, and, you know, it sort of slowly seeped into the modes of production of different areas, starting at the fringes. You know, by 1973, we've got Vito Acconci's theme song, which I think is like the classic articulation of media in the visual arts. But media is a thing in itself. You know, there's the world of cinema, there's the world of television. It's much broader than the art world, as we discussed before. This moment allowed people who were excluded from production to get into production, and this event brought them all in. So I wonder if you could tell us about this from your perspective, particularly if you can start sort of digging into your own experience. You know, as we close, we will move on. I'd like to push this towards yourself and your life and your work as it emerged.
Yeah. So so let me just so what the image that everyone is seeing today is, and what's in the exhibition, is actually a bus shelter poster from the event from 1989, and the image is actually a painting by Nora Patrick. She's an Argentinian woman, and I just, you know, we had a huge connection with Latin American peoples. This is in Vancouver. There was a huge presence in Vancouver. Women were at the forefront of the struggle globally, and it was really coming out of those really heavy contestations after the Chilean coup, you know, with Allende being replaced with Pinochet, and there were solidarity campaigns, was a main engagement across all artist communities. Where I worked at the time, Women in Focus had a gallery, and they were showing Latin American works such as Women Art in the Periphery. Note the word periphery. We were all immersed, right, in sort of the literature of American, you know, Latin America. Kissinger was there. You know, books like The Open Veins of Latin America, The Tin Mines of Bolivia, Co-op Radio, all across. There was this kind of real engagement with Latin American community, and I wanted to put that out there because the image was from Nora's work. A few things I want to say, and I'm going to start tying in my personal here, but because people have asked me this, like, why you, why Vancouver? So what is the impetus really behind this in a way? This is very much linked, Niranjan, to the fact that I am from the third world. I was born in the Mau Mau freedom movement, fighting for independence against the British Empire. I grew up in the color bar. You know, it was a really heavily racialized context. Yeah, I have I have so many personal stories about growing up in this era, you know, but the color bar was really that we lived in segregation. People think it just happened in South Africa, but it happened where I lived, where I was born. So we lived in segregation, discrimination, and as Etienne Balibar speaks about bordering, we were actually bordered, right, between white toilets and non-white toilets. And from our beautiful, Art Deco home, designed by an Italian architect, we would look out across the lawn to the Forbidden Impala Club, a swimming pool and a social club for whites only. And I guess I can say that as a child, I knew this was not right. You feel it. It's palpable, right? And there were so many incidents anyway. But these have been, I guess, the heavy influences in my life. And this has given me the impetus to make change. And I think the making of Invisible Colors is very much this site of activation, right? It was an amazing event, 1989. Over 100 films, work from 28 countries, film and video. But it kind of really emerged amidst those contestations on nation building and the making of that global neoliberal order, which we've just talked about at length, right? And I think that, there was all that upheaval of the late 70s and the 80s, and it really foregrounded race and gender and the politics of cultural difference. And we talked about all of this, the changes that were occurring in the global order, in the political economy, right? And then we already mentioned this, the emergence of videos in new media. And we talk about the Porter Pack. There were community television, Rajah's community television. And like you said, at that time, we were fighting broadcasting, right? We were fighting television. It wasn't speaking about our stories. Artist run centers started sharing their production resources. And I think video really opens up that accessibility. It also challenged and expanded the ability for the artist, I think, especially women who really saw a greater means to further feminist art movement also in this country as part of the second wave of feminism, in Canada. But just to come to one thing, it's interesting because you said this as well. I was recently posed this question by Wei Chang. She's a research student at UBC at the moment. And she says, despite often being referenced as a seminal event for other practices and discourses in the 90s, IDC hasn't had a ton of critical attention. What does this mean? What does this actually point to? And does this point to something missing in Canada's cultural self-understanding? I think it's very pertinent today as it was then, and that it's being posed again today.
So here, the struggle for the perpetual struggle, the perpetual effort is to be seen. Right? So first you struggle even to get access to the resources to make stuff and to be seen. The massive mitigates against certain sectors, indigenous and others, getting access. Then when you build the understanding and consensus, get the access, get the show, get it done, have a success, then you have to deal with the being seen in the discourse and who's doing the writing and who is able to navigate the spaces of production at that level to create visibility. So it's an ongoing struggle. As one level of it is resolved, we move on to the next. And in just that note, I'm going to not let you say any more because we have to move on to the next slide. And I think you can tie things up here.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
A little bit.
I think you're right on, because my response to that is the Massey report, literally, right? And earlier I'd been in an interview with John Cole, 1991, I'm talking about, I underlined the need to decolonize our minds, right? This is like from then, right? So anyway.
Yeah, so Zainab, we must touch on this, and before question time, we only have a few minutes. So this is through the soles of my mother's feet, 1997, a 4-channel ×2 8-screen video projection, video installation, I beg your pardon, at the Burnaby Jamaat Khana, or house of worship for the Ismaili community.
The mosque.
The mosque, your community. Yeah. So the art world comes to the life world of Zainub Verjee, and all the negotiations that have to take place, the transgressions that have to be addressed or avoided, the taboos that may have modulated the work. The idea here being that that this is an expression of yourself in Canada and your people, in a sense, your family. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, I'll tell you really quickly. So yeah, it was curated by the Burnaby Art Gallery, and the site was the mosque or the Ismaili. It's now the Ismaili Center, actually, in Burnaby, BC. I just want to mention the making of it a little bit, because Kate Craig of the Western Front traveled with me from Canada all the way to India and Kenya and Uganda to shoot the work, and it was an amazing experience for us, because obviously it was the first time she was getting an insight into really who I was and what my background was and what was driving me in a way that she wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And there was others that were really instrumental in making this work. But I think that I just want to just tie it back to a little bit what we're saying, and then I'm going to make it a little bit more about what you're seeing on the image. So, I need to say this because the end of the 80s, we saw a cultural turn in many disciplines, and especially anthropology. And by the mid-90s, art was seeing an ethnographic turn in response to globalization. We're back in that space again, right? And in this context, there were so many disciplines of architecture, let's say, were sites of contestations against globalization. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture was really significant in this intervention, right? Because it started to foreground the vernacular. And this was at the cusp of global modernism. And the reason I wanted to say this is that the vernacular is the leitmotif of my work, through the soles of my mother's feet, right? In the original installation, it was constructed on the principle of the octagon, which is the motif of the mosque. It's dedicated to my mother and the women in the community. And it really tracks the migration of our community from India to Africa to the Western world. The working title was Nomadic Architecture, because I was, in this instance, I was saying that architecture refers not only to the built structures, but also to how a community interacts with the cultural, social, and natural worlds. And this work was never understood, very much like Invisible Colors, right? But it preempts, actually, Hal Foster's essay on artist as ethnographer, right? It wasn't understood at the time, right? The people weren't able to read it. So, but this image that we have up here, you can see the images of the feet, right? And so I'm also asked about the title, right? Through the soles of my mother's feet. Actually, it's an expression in the Quran, and it implies that the way to heaven is through the soles of the mother's feet, right? And feet are really important signifiers for us, right? Touching of feet, kissing of feet, etc. Yeah, and it starts with the story of feet. Actually, me looking at my feet reminds me of my mother's feet, and so on. The story goes, and ends up in this amazing work. But anyway, I know you have a good story about feet.
Yes, I do, but I think I'll save my story. I'll save my story. But what I will do, though, I will take some time to make my point, which is, and it relates to your point about visibility too, and that is that we need theoretical mechanisms, framings, discursive framing discourses to be able to see. So you need the spotlight with which to see the work that's already been done. And here, I'd like to plug my own post-traditional theory, because what you're saying exactly embodies that the fact that it was not visible within the modernist discourse. Postmodern discourse is just the return of the repressed. But I'm saying, listen, tradition never went away, and modernism is just another tradition, and post is not even worth mentioning. We are living in a world of multiples, multitudes, diversity, and we need framing mechanisms that incorporate and enable us to see. So to save time, Zainab, because people, I'm sure, have questions, or at least Catherine will have some, I will just give a quick synopsis and ask you for a comment of the next two works, which are actually shown in one place, in one piece. So this is two works. Art is a public good, and art is life, is work. There are new works, text-based works, similar to Status of the Artist. And, these really strike a chord with me, because a lot of my practice has been to do with understanding this, metaphysical paradigm, Ananda Kumaraswamy, the idea that modernism is displacing a traditional worldview in which, art was vocation. So every man was a special kind of artist. There's no such thing as a special kind of man being an artist. So the potter, the calligrapher, we're all artists. Even the mother at home rearing the kids, we're all doing our artistry in our work. And so this is the diagonal as well. This is the transversal again, art and life and work. And it critiques the political economy at one end, and at the other end, it's at home in the mother's feet, at the mother's feet. It's the whole of life together. And art is a public good, and I'll finish with this and let you have the last word, is actually a political statement. It's a critique of the art market, of the way in which we have privatized the art production, the biennales, the fairs, and we have hollowed out the spaces in which art is allowed to reveal its aspect as a shared public good.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've summed it up. Really, this is that art is being instrumentalized under the neoliberal logic, and I've said this earlier. We talked about the festivalization, and right now, literally, for every ill in society, there's a hammer of art. Right, art will fix it. It'll alleviate everything, but it's not. We know that that's not the case. But it's been made into that, and for art is life, his work is art. It's that continuum, right? It's part of that Fluxus ethos. So I see that we probably should move on to the questions, but yeah, I think you yourself summed that up. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Zainab.
Thank you,
Catherine. We're ready for you.
Yeah.
I think Catherine has to be allowed back in because of the screens. We had to push her out. So I think we may be taking a moment. And maybe till Catherine comes back on, I will continue a little bit about this sort of the arc, I guess, of Zainab's production. And if you take a note at what's behind her Z, that Zainab's Z
completely
reflects or echoes the diagonal of the transversal.
Oh, right.
It's no coincidence. It's written.
There you go. That fits with your work as well, I think, right?
Yeah, notions that, in the traditional worldview, that some things are preordained, some things are in the stars, there's a little bit of difference from the rational. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good, thank you so much. Something very strange happened. When I tried to come back into the room, I got kicked out completely. And so now I've signed back on and I've lost the chat. But I have to tell you that before I left, there were no specific questions in the chat. There were several congratulations to you, Zainab, and several people commenting, supporting some of the topics of conversation that you were having. So we didn't have a specific question. I am very intrigued by, Niranjan, your story of feet. I don't know. So I might provoke you to share that with us.
Sure. So there are quite a few stories of feet. And the first thing is when Zainab told me that her feet were like her mother's, I thought, oh my God, that's the thought I've had myself. My feet are like my mother's. One of my daughters has this little toe that's more like my mother's. In fact, my grandmother, it begins with my grandmother. So the idea of lineage and tradition and things being handed down. But the story is actually the importance of feet, the significance of feet in traditional culture. And I was at a conference in which in the 90s, in which I think this is the story Zainab meant, but with Apinan Pushananda, who's one of the leading figures in bringing the art of Asia, Southeast Asia, to the world stage. Really, we have to credit him for bringing awareness of Southeast Asia. As I'm a Malaysian, so Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. He's from Thailand. And, the Thais are very modern and very traditional at the same time. And he was on a panel, and I can't name the others offhand, but they were leading figures, curators, dealing in Los Angeles conference. He's dealing with ideas of this Biennale movement, this globalization, and they were creating this unifying discourse about world art. And Apinan was the leader of this and part of this, and they were congratulating each other. And it bothered me a little. So I, kind of half instinctively took off my right shoe and my sock, and I put my foot up on the chair in front of me. I was in the second row, right? And I showed my foot, somehow knowing that it would do something. I didn't know what. And Apinan hit the roof. Oh. Apinan really got offended. And of course, he's a Thai. He's a Thai. So within this veneer of modern discourse of Derrida, we have other people functioning with completely different values. And this is something that, we need the transversal to highlight. And it's not just, people from Asia, it's all kinds of angles. There's an intersectionality to this problem. And the ability to remove the cloud of knowing, if you like, what we think we know, and to look at it in different ways is what I think is evident in Zainab's work. And what's more important is that not only does she show us how to look at it, she actually does the action of, going into the institution and working this, actually bringing it back from the institutional perspective. So that this is, I think that's the story anyhow.
Oh, there's lots of people saying thank you. Oh, look at,
That's a wonderful exhibition. And Apinan is my friend, by the way. Since then, he was very gracious afterwards, though we've never discussed the meaning of the gesture.
No, never?
He's been very kind.
So thank you very much. We still have no questions in our chat room. I was thinking though, Zainab, when you were talking about invisible colors, and I know it's something that I remember from the late 80s, and talking about, how that manifested itself back then and what we're experiencing now, and how something like that seems to be even more necessary, or as necessary now, perhaps, as it was back then. So just talking about that, this is 31 years ago. And how do you see the context now versus then being the same or different?
Sorry, I had my mic off. I think the context is the same. I just don't think that the ability to do something like that is there. I don't think we'd be able to put on another invisible colors type of event. I think the world is, the context is the same, but the multiracial solidarities that were created in the making of that event, that amazing event, is broken. It's not there. This invisible colors really brought together Indigenous people from all over the world. okay? It brought together women of color of this country in the United States and Britain, but it brought women from third world women from all over the world, and each one with its own relationship to its nation state. It's very different now, but those multiracial solidarities are broken now. They don't exist, right? And I think it was also really created, it was sort of three things that happened with Invisible Colors, right? It foregrounded like the histories of struggle of women of color and third world filmmakers. I think it really brought, to the forefront the kind of issues of race to second wave feminism, and those multiracial solidarities were created. And I think it really created like this new alignment in that engagement, in that emergent global politics of third cinema. From a global perspective, Invisible Colors was the first gender-based solidarity event of women of color that responded to the attempts made in the meetings following the Third World Filmmakers meeting in 1973 in Algiers. And it was all men. All of those meetings were all men until this event.
We have two questions, Zainab. One from Donna is, why is the solidarity not there now?
The solidarity has been broken in all kinds of ways because I think I kind of speak to this in my interview with Rosemary Heather in Canadian Art, but what we've done is become more, at least in this country, I think there's like a tripartite that's occurred, for example, right? And a segmentation, so we're not speaking to each other anymore. Even the terminology, right? We like BIPOC, that's broken, right? It's Black, Indigenous, people of color. We don't talk about so much. It's like it's become a very different kind of solidarity. We don't come together in the same ways, right? Even back then in Kenora, Indigenous people were aligned with Third World, right? There were Indigenous people from Canada going to Tanzania to see what was being done there. It's all gone. It's finished. That's not there anymore. The powers that be won't allow it, right? It's divide and rule.
I have a question from Alice. She says, I would love to ask Zainab how you've been able to be a sustainable force as a supportive role model for members of the BIPOC community in the struggle for equity and inclusion in the arts and cultural sector. Do you focus on specific pillars, issues, groups? And thank you so much for doing so much.
Sorry, can you? I didn't catch all of that. Sorry,
okay.
You broke up a little bit.
I'm sorry. I would love to ask Zainab how you've been able to be a sustainable force as a supportive role model for members of the BIPOC community in the struggle for equity and inclusion in the arts and cultural sector. Do you focus on specific pillars, issues, groups? And thank you.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thank you. I think I've always, from a very early age, been acutely aware of the political economy or the politics of place, because it had affected us so much. I mean, you heard my story around and when the Mau Mau growing up in Kenya during those times, and so it's the terms of the politics and that economy that's always been something that I've held on to and tried to understand and work from that space. So even right now, I saw in COVID what was the opportunity, for artists, right? Basic income being one of them, and kind of understanding that the space of labor, right? And so even like the status of the artists, I think it's really. I've been thinking about diversity and inclusion a lot. I'd given a little talk at Business for the Arts on this, about how problematic this terminology is and where it comes from and how it breaks us apart actually instead of bringing us together, right?
So I think
diversity and inclusion is a workforce. Yeah, I was just saying it's workforce terminology, but it's not about solidarity.
So on a related note, Bojana says, Zainab, you've recently spoken quite a bit on the issue of diversity in art institutions and the problems of diversity and equity as a capitalist Western model of responding to issues of racism and sexism in art. Can you elaborate on this? And is there a connection of diversity to lack of labor rights in the arts?
Okay, give me a moment. That's, oops. Sorry, give me a moment. That's quite a bit there. So I have been speaking quite a bit on this, obviously, because I'm working very much in these issues constantly in my work, and also as an art service organization, where we see that even since the onset of COVID, everybody rushed to put out statements, right? And if you ask organizations what's their topmost priority, they'll say diversity and inclusion. But what does that actually mean, right? How is that changing structural racism or the structural barriers? How is that actually addressing the real change that needs to be made at all levels of institutions and within communities in kind of breaking the barriers, which is what we want to break. So I think that we've appropriated a language, those words, and think that they mean something, right? But they don't mean what we think they mean, right? Diversity and inclusion is really a productivity tool. It had nothing to do with systemic racism. It really came out of actually a Workforce 2000 report that was part of this globalization of labor, where we needed to diversify labor, and it had really to do with increasing productivity rather than dealing with the systemic issues. And that's why I feel it's really important that we talk about these things. I mean, we've heard so much about the future of work, right? What does that actually mean? What will it mean for cultural institutions? How will we actually make those changes?
Catherine, can I come in a little?
Yes, please.
So I really like. Was that Dana Claxton? That question?
No, that was someone named Bojana.
Okay. No, the previous one. The second question.
Alice.
Alice Claxton. Dana. Didn't you say Dana? No.
No. Okay. Bojana.
Okay. So anyway, the idea, the question that I'm referring to is the one that asked why the solidarity is broken.
Oh.
If it is, that question, right? So the idea there, I think, is that there are no lasting solidarities. This is so evident in politics, but it's also evident in life. We have divorces and marriages and blended families. There's no such thing as a permanent allegiance. And so again, the diagonal. Sorry to keep telling that idea, but the thing is to keep noting the changes in the verticals and the horizontal. So you have the power structure, which is always stacked. Look at Hindu culture, Indian culture, the caste system. It's stacked so well that you can't shift it, regardless of the most progressive constitution and legislation for reorganization. You can't shift the stack because it's centuries old, right? And so and then you have the verticals, which are, let's say, the ontologies, the categories. We talked about black, white, yellow, or brown, or indigenous, whatever, women, transgender, whatever you want to do. We are playing with language. I think Zainab mentions language. So you can't avoid it because whether you're a constructivist or a realist, you know, language is functional in the definition of creating things. So it's always about negotiating and moving. So the allegiances have to reform around new things. And here I'd like to say that, Zainab, you've hit the nerve with your present activism around work, because this unites everybody. Right? This unites at least artists, let's say, all of us. You know, we if this is the main issue, which it is, which we haven't recognized over the course of your map, right? It's slowly been happening, clearly been happening, but we've gone on with our careers. Maybe now's the moment, post-COVID, as you say in your article in the Georgia Strait, that we now look at that allegiance and worry a little bit less about the others. They're all relevant and they're all contested, you know. But so the movement to create allegiance is also diagonal.
Yeah, and this is really tying in what I've already said during our conversation. Is this whole you know, this move from work, labor to jobs, right? D&I is all about that. This jobs. It's about workforce. It's not about work. It's not about artists. It's not about somebody writing a book for 7 years to make, you know, the great Canadian novel. It's not a musician, you know, trying to. This is all about jobs. The D&I is all about that.
And
anyway,
you know,
yeah.
And in many ways, so is diversity, right? It's about accounting. A lot of it is about accounting, the numbers, you know, like you got 4 brown ones and 3 white ones and, you know, a couple of yellows, right? I mean, this is what you're doing. You won't use the words because they're rude, but you're doing it in your statistics to get your funding for next time round. So it's all part of the same political, economic administration of art. And as a whole, excuse me, I better plug in my power, because at the end of the day, it's the juice that counts. So at the end of the day, you know, we've got to keep the eye on the ball, which is exactly what Zainab's been doing for decades. You know, that what's the next important issue? It's not the same. It's not the same as it was in Invisible Colors. We're somewhere else.
One of our audience members just posted a link to Basic Income and the Arts campaign. So for those who can have a look at that. I think we've exceeded our time, but everything has been so fascinating. And I know that we've kept our audience members really engaged over the last hour. So thank you so much. And I want to thank Niranjan for moderating and hosting this conversation with Zainab. And of course, Zainab, thank you so much for everything that you do, for your work in the exhibition, for all the work that you have done for many, many decades to support artists and cultural workers in Canada. So thank you. It's an honor to have been working with you over the last several months on this exhibition. And unfortunately, the AGA is closed to the public until January 11th due to Alberta health restrictions, but we will be opening the exhibition again, which is open until February 14th. So we do have a virtual walkthrough online if people want to kind of take a walk through the exhibition. And also we will be hosting a second artist conversation with Governor General Laureate Michael Fernandez in conversation with Roy Cossie on January 11th. So everybody is sending so many thanks to you, Zainab and Niranjan, for your conversation tonight through the chat. So thank you. And I wish everybody a very happy holiday season.
You too, and thanks to everyone for being part of the conversation with us. Niranjan, always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the audience. Thanks, Zainab and Catherine and Helen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Helen, yes. Thank you.
Oh, Helen has been our facilitator, online facilitator. So thank you, everybody. And again, everybody have a very safe and healthy holiday season.
You too. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.